Hello, listeners. Been wondering how you can help the show? Probably not. But here are 5 things you can do. 1. Subscribe. Support the show by clicking the subscription link in the show notes. 2. Review on iTunes, on our website, www.afraidofnothingpodcast.com, or on whatever app you listen to. 3. Donate. When you go to our website, click the cute coffee cup icon. Or in the show notes, click the subscription link. 4. Share. Sharing really is caring. Tell your friends and even your enemies to check out the show. 5. Watch. Wait a minute, it's a podcast, not a movie. Actually, it's both. Check the show notes to find out where to watch the documentary. You can also rent it on Prime Video. That's it. Oh, one last thing. Enjoy this episode. Every once in a while, I kind of do something a little bit different. One time was when I went to the Conjuring house and followed a medium around while he picked up a bunch of cool stuff. And then I did a post kind of analysis with him and EVP expert John Huntington at the Conjuring house. I've also gone to haunted houses like S.K. Pierce and interviewed people there, as well as the Murdoch Whitney house with Don O'Neill. This is another one of those different shows. Tonight, we have 3 guests. One of them is a old favorite, Rob Guttrow, who you usually know as the pet psychic. But here he is also part of a group called Inspired Ghost Tracking. And we have with him 2 other members of the Inspired Ghost Tracking team who you'll meet shortly. And they're going to share a crazy, crazy case that happened about 10 years ago, but still one of the ones you don't hear about too often. So settle in. Enjoy the show.
In a world where nothing is known, nothing is certain, reality is not real. Wake up! Be afraid of nothing. I'm Bob Heskey.
Robert.
The host with the ghost.
This is my podcast, based on my paranormal documentary, Afraid of Nothing. Each episode, we talk to people who see life and the afterlife through a different lens. Join me.
Who is this large man? And what's he doing in our bedroom?
As we lift the veil and open our minds to see beyond our eyes lie. This is Afraid of Nothing.
Well, we are here with not 1, but 3 great guests tonight. One is my good buddy, Rob Guttrow, who's been on 3 times, my all-time most popular download. Now, Rob is typically, I'm talking to him about his pet psychic experience, but tonight we're talking about his paranormal experiences of the 2-legged sort as a paranormal investigator for Inspired Ghost Tracking in Maryland. Hey, Rob, welcome to the show, and I'd like you to introduce your 2 cohorts, Margaret and Troy.
Thank you, Bob. Yes, so Inspired Ghost Tracking has been around since 2008, and it was founded by Margaret. So Margaret is the founder and the manager, and her name is Margaret Ehrlich. And Troy Klein is one of the mediums on IGT with me. And Troy is an amazing medium, very sensitive. Troy picks up quite a number of things that I don't, and we actually complement each other when we do a lot of the investigations.
Well, that's great. So, Margaret, I'm going to kick it over to you right now. Inspired Ghost Tracking, it's not one of those cutesy paranormal acronyms that you hear. It seems to have a real purpose in how you name this. So can you tell us where the name Inspired Ghost Tracking came from and how long you've been ghost hunting as a group?
A friend of mine got it. She ran a shop called Inspired Journey. So we kept kicking around a name for a ghost group. And all of a sudden it popped up and it was like, what about Inspired Ghost Tracking? And I said, hey, I love it. So we went with that. And that was in 2008, and we've been rolling ever since.
Now, how did you get into ghost hunting?
You know, I had a paranormal experience when I was a kid and I lived in a haunted house. So it kind of intrigued me then. But what started me was divorce, empty nest syndrome, looking for something to do. And I went with a friend to another paranormal group. And I said, I really like this. And from there on, that's what I did. I started my own group and we've been happy ever since.
Oh, that's awesome. Now, you mostly focus on private residential hauntings. So I was wondering if you could tell us where you're located and if you could walk us through the case submission process, how you identify cases, how people contact you, what paperwork they have to fill out, and how do you set up and schedule these investigations?
Okay, so most of the time, well, we do mainly residential because we love to help the people. And it's easier to help the families and when they have children and all that. They reach out to me through our email, and I set up to do a phone interview with them where I ask them a whole lot of questions. There's about 50 questions, some of which get asked the same question in different ways just to see where they are and all. And depending on how I feel about them, the home, and all of that, depends on if we schedule it. If we schedule it, I get a group of investigators together. We go out, we do the investigation, and of course, then the heavy work starts with going over the evidence. Then I get the mediums, Troy and Rob. They go out there. If there's something there that might need to be cleared out, they're my guys that do it.
Do you have any psychic abilities yourselves, or are you just, I'm kind of a tunnel vision guy, but do you have any abilities?
I am a little bit sensitive. I do feel things, so I know when there's something there. And then, of course, it's that, sixth sense that even with people that you kind of know, I don't want to go in this house. There's something wrong.
Yeah.
I use that part of my sixth sense too.
Excellent. So, Troy, you are the second medium, and Rob said you complement each other very well. First question is, how long have you been with IGT, and how long have you been a practicing medium?
Yeah, actually, I've been with IGT now, gosh, it's probably been around 8, 9, 10 years, something like that. It was funny. I have always, in my entire life, have had certain sensory perceptions, and I've been able to do certain things and feel and see and sense things, and through a lot of different types of ways. But it didn't really come to full fruition until I met Rob. And Rob and I worked at the same place. We were having lunch one day, and I didn't know at that point that Rob had written a book on the paranormal or was a medium, and he didn't know that about me either. And we were just having lunch, and suddenly this just came up, and we started talking. He told me about his books, and I'm like, that's interesting. And I told him about experiences in my life, about my father and my grandmother on my dad's side, and all these experiences that happened. And as Rob and I were talking, I shared with him some of the stories that my dad had and my grandmother had. And somehow we started talking about pets in the afterlife. And I told him about this wonderful little beagle that I grew up with. It was 12 years old. His name was Pete. And we were talking about him. And I said, I've always just carried a sense of guilt about that dog. He was one of my best friends, my best buddies. There was a point in my life where my dad, who was a minister, we moved every 3 or 4 years growing up to a different church. And I was like, oh, wow. So I would lose my friends. I'd lose everybody I ever knew. And then I'd have to start all over again. As a result of that, and this happens to military families and families that travel around, you sometimes can develop this really hardcore wall where you're able to compartmentalize things. And when you lose people, you just shut that part of your life out and you start over again because it's too painful. When you lose these people all the time, especially as a kid, and I got really good at that. Finally, when I was a teenager, I was getting ready to go to college, realized I couldn't take my dog with me. And I was talking to my dad, and I said, Dad, you're going to have to take care of my dog for me. And he's like, oh, sure. And in my mind and in my inside of me, I had already started that separation. I was losing Pete because I was going to college. So emotionally, I just was shutting down, and I was transferring all that over to my dad. And I couldn't deal with the pain. And that's the only way I knew how to deal with that growing up, which, of course, wasn't very healthy and wasn't very good. So what ended up happening is I emotionally detached from my little buddy Pete and went to college. And then I came home. It was about a year later. I was visiting, and Dad had turned my little dog loose to go out. We were way out in the country, and Pete was a beagle, so he loved to chase rabbits and whatever he could find. And Dad called down the stairs and said, Troy, something has happened. And I'm like, what? And he said, Pete he was hit by a car. We found him on the side of the road. It still chokes me up. So I said, well, that's okay. He was already old and all that stuff, and that detachment kicked in. But within moments, the emotion hit me, and the guilt hit me. And I realized I wasn't there for him, when he died, and I wasn't there for him during his last year. And I shut down and didn't have pets for probably the next 15, 20 years, and didn't realize that was why. I just thought it didn't happen. So when Rob and I were talking about this, Rob said, Troy, don't be surprised if Pete doesn't start trying to connect with you again, and in some way. And I'm like thinking, this all was new to me about Rob and the mediumship and all of this. And I'm like, well, that's a nice thing to say. I just kind of, in a way, just kind of dismissed it. And then I was on my way home, and I started smelling just this fresh smell of hay in my car, like when people baled hay or in a field or grass. It was really strong in the car. And I'm like, that's weird. Where's that coming from? And then I started getting a sense of my dog, Pete. And then I realized Pete was an outdoor dog. He was a beagle. We had a house, and he lived in a bed of hay his entire life. So anytime you smelled Pete or was with Pete and hugged him, you smelled hay, like strong sense of hay. And I'm like, holy cow, my dog's in my car. And I was like, I started to sense him, and I could feel him. And it blew me away. And the thing that changed my life about Pete and something about unconditional love was that Pete showed up in the car in spirit, and I could sense him in my mind and my spirit mind. I could smell him physically, and he was happy. His tail's wagging. He was so excited to see me. He wasn't blaming me for that last year of his life at all. He showed up unconditionally with unconditional love and loved me just as much as he did on day one. And it was me who had been carrying all that guilt. And that's what Pete taught me that day. And Pete came back several more times. And after that, I was able to have pets again. And it kind of opened up the door for me to release all of that guilt. So that was my first hardcore experience with Mr. Rob Guttrow, learning about the paranormal. Before that, I had been talking to Rob about an experience I had had in West Virginia at one of my best friend's homes, who had this old Victorian home he was restoring. I went over to just visit them in deep in West Virginia one night, and they weren't home. And he said, my friend Jeff, he said, just come in, where the key is, just let yourself in, where the room is, go on up the stairs, and I'll see you in the morning. I have to take care of some people tonight, but I'll be in it first thing in the morning. I'm like, okay. So I went in, and it's an old house, and they have one of those old doorbells that you turn it and it jingles, and that's how people would let people know they were outside. And as I was letting myself into the house, I could hear the jingle of that crazy doorbell. And I thought, okay, that's pretty cool. And I locked the door, turned the lights out, went up this old flight of stairs, went into this old tiny room where I was staying, and I fell asleep. And I had this dream, a vivid dream of a young man in his early 20s, dark hair, that came into my room, and he sat just on the end of my bed and was having a conversation with me in his dream that, oh yeah, this is my house. This is where I used to live. I'm like, oh, that's cool. In a dream, you think this is all okay.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, this is pretty cool. So who are you? And he told me, and he said, yeah, I lived here, but there was a fire. The house didn't burn down because it was actually the foundation. Everything's built out of old railroad ties that were here in the area. And so the house was okay, but the smoke filled the entire place. I died in my sleep, and I actually died in this room. And I was like, oh, wow, I'm really sorry about that. He goes, no, I'm okay now. I just wanted someone to know that. He was super nice, really nice guy. And then I heard somebody walk into the house physically, and it woke me up out of that dream. And I heard the door jingle, and I heard footsteps coming up the stairs, walking right past my room. And I thought it was my buddy Jeff coming back. It was 4:00 in the morning. I thought, well, he's coming back early. And I'm like, hey, Jeff. Didn't hear anything. I'm like, hey, Jeff. Nothing. And I'm like, well, I'll catch him at breakfast. He's just not listening. And then I went back to sleep. 2 hours later, I hear the doorbell again. This time it's louder. I hear footfall coming up the stairs, much louder, walking down the hallway in front of my room, much louder. And I'm like, Jeff. He's like, hey, what's up? And I'm like, why did you come in to the house twice? He's like, no, it's just this first time I've been home. Nobody's been here all night. And I thought he was playing a trick on me. So I, got ready and went downstairs, had breakfast. He goes, what were you talking about, me coming in twice? I said, well, at 4 this morning, you woke me up. You came in and I yelled for you. And I heard you walk by the hallway and up the stairs. I heard the doorbell. And he's like, that wasn't me. He goes, nobody was in the house and the door was locked. And he goes, you heard the ghost. I'm like, yeah, right. He goes, no. He goes, since we've been renovating this house, we've been up on the 3rd floor working on certain things, and we'd hear somebody walking around in the middle floor where your room is. And no one was ever there. We always thought it was somebody coming in to bring food in or whatever. And he goes, it's just some male ghost. We don't know who it is. And we just call it the ghost. And he goes, you heard the ghost. I'm like, that's really weird. I said, well, I had this dream. And I told him about the dream. And he goes, there's no way you had that dream. I'm like, yeah. He goes, you don't know the history of this house. I never told you. And I know you don't know the history of this house. He goes, there was a fire. And there was a guy who died in here. And he died on that floor where your room is now. It just shocked me. And he was blown away. And it confirmed that, wow, I really had a significant paranormal experience. And what happened is that ghost never came back. He told his story. That's all he needed to do. He wanted it to be known. And then he was fine. He went on. He crossed over. And so I was sharing that with Rob. And Rob helped me with that. And then, of course, Rob says, well, Troy, I think you should come with us on an investigation. I'm like, oh, that sounds fun. I'm thinking, well, I'll go somewhere and they're going to talk about maybe somebody's parakeet died or something like that. And it's going to kind of let me kind of ease myself into this. Oh, no, I show up and they have people with recorders and people with taking notes and following me around. And I was kind of cracking up. I'm like, I'm going to be really wrong. This is going to be way off, but I'm going to have a good time. And I won't go any further into that, but what it ended up being was the double murder investigation was my first investigation with IGT.
Oh, my God. Wow. Well, it's good. Rob being the caring guy he was, we'll talk about it later, but he took the brunt of the physical sensations from that one. So we'll go into that. One question, one thing. Troy, did you work with Rob? Are you a meteorologist too, or was this a different day job before Rob?
No, he's a meteorologist, and I'm an education technology specialist, and I was working at the same location. We knew of each other through people, and we had been around, and we just had never really become friends. And we had always thought, oh, we should just catch up and, just tag up. And so we decided we'll have lunch, and we just did.
Wow.
And that's when it all started.
That's amazing. That's awesome. Okay, Rob, I'm going to turn it back to you. First of all, you have to take Mr. Troy Klein's story and put that in Pets in the Afterlife 4 if you haven't put it in one of your early books, because that's a great story. But you wrote a book, Lessons Learned from Talking to the Dead. And we're going to go in a couple minutes to talk about a very cool one there, the double murder ghost investigation. But before we do that, Rob, can you tee up another personal favorite from that book?
Sure. I guess the case of the burned ghost would probably be another fascinating case. This book that I'm referring to, the double murder ghost investigation, is actually 2 of my books. The latest one is Case Files of Inspired Ghost Tracking. The case of the burned ghost is also in the same book, Case Files. And it was quite interesting because we also found a spirit dog and a spirit grandmother. And we found out that the burned ghost was actually an accident victim that was burned and attached herself to one of the homeowners.
Now, Rob, did you feel the burning? I mean, sometimes you feel how people pass. Did you actually, was that one of those cases where you felt what happened to the person, or?
Yeah, actually, both Troy and I experienced the heat of this ghost, because they do share the physical sensations of pain they experienced just before they died. In that particular case, Bob, she actually showed me a vision of what she looked like after the accident. She was in a car that caught fire.
Oh.
The thing that really stood out was the image of earrings melted into her ears.
Wow.
And as soon as I said that, the homeowner really knew who it was that we were talking about. So we were able to identify her by name, actually, and cross her over.
So I have to ask, yeah, you guys see some pretty vivid things. So when you're just relaxing and kicking back, do you not watch horror movies? Do you watch like comedies and like more laid back things, Rob? Or what do you do for entertainment to get away from this stuff?
I only watch superhero things.
Okay, that's good.
That's it.
The good guy wins.
That's it.
That's great. Yeah. Quick question for you and Troy before we go into the double murder ghost investigation. Have either of you had premonitions before you went to a site that Margaret kind of teed you up for? I know she only gives you like an hour notice, but have you ever had weird dreams before going to a ghost investigation or a weird premonition on the drive down there? I'll start with you, Rob, first, and then I'll go to Troy.
I think that actually there was one particular case that Troy and I both had the same kind of feelings for, and that was a ghostly attachment that was related to a piece of jewelry. We were both looking for a jewelry box when we got in there. Do you remember that, Troy?
I do, and we had sometimes, to be honest with you, a lot of the times when I'm going on an investigation, I start working on protection and put light around me. I pray about it, working on it before I even get into the car to go to the investigation. And if I'm guided in spirit not to go, then I won't go. But that actually every time I've gone, but I always put that out there. If I'm not supposed to go and this is too dangerous or there's something up to be attached. And then on the way, I often get premonitions like Rob's talking about the jewelry, about certain tombstones, about one time we had a premonition of a Ouija board that somebody had used in their house, which unlocked all kinds of hell in this particular home we were investigating. What I do is I have a little notebook just in the passenger seat while I'm there. And if I get these premonitions, I wait until I get to a stoplight or something, and I scribble it down real quick. And if I have time, I'll draw a quick image or a picture, and I tuck it away and I carry it with me so that when we're at the investigation, when there's evidence of that, I pull it out and I show Rob or Margaret what I drew on the way there as confirmation that this is actually a real connection. And so it's kind of a way to confirm that the premonition was accurate and that we're on track with what we're supposed to be doing.
And one instance of that, Bob, occurred when we were investigating Maryland Mansion, and Troy came up to the mansion, and he showed me a picture of one particular tombstone that he sketched that was unique. And sure enough, it was a cemetery behind the mansion, and there was only one tombstone looked like that.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was the oldest one, yeah.
That's something you got that both Rob and Troy you do is spirit art, right? I mean, Rob, are you more after the fact that you draw something and then, after you've done a walkthrough that you do spirit art? And Troy, are you kind of before you get there, you'll take a sketch pad out and draw something up to see if it resonates?
That has been the way it's played out. What's been really cool is I'll do spirit art on the way. You're right. And then when I get there, if I do get an image, I'll sketch it out. I've done it once or twice. But there's often times where it comes so powerfully to Rob that he will completely sketch out a really accurate drawing of something that we can, someone that we can identify either in a picture or in some other way it's confirmed later on, which has been pretty powerful. So yeah, I guess in a way, like Rob said, we play off of each other. We do spirit art, usually never at the same time. It's kind of opposite of each other.
Yeah, I do it during the investigations, Bob. So it's almost like me asking the ghost to stand still for a portrait.
Yeah,
because that's actually what I do is I sketch them when I'm in their presence.
You sell those on eBay, or I was thinking, did you put any of your sketches from either of you in the case studies book, or have you ever put them in a book that people can see them, or that's something you guys just keep to yourself?
Oh no, they're in quite a few books. There are several sketches in the case files of Inspired Ghost Tracking. I drew a portal. There was a steelworker's ghost.
Mm-hmm.
There was a preacher that I identified. There was a gentleman from the 1860s that I sketched out. So yeah, there's all kinds of sketches in there.
Oh, that's great. That's excellent. Troy, were you going to say something? Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, there's one I just can't help tell you. This was really cool. We were investigating a mansion. There were quite a few people there. Sometimes they gave tours of it and all of that. And there was one point where there was a ghost of a young African woman who showed up. And this was one of these Southern style mansions that had slaves or servants back in the day. We were there with some people, and this ghost shows up, and I could see her in my spirit mind. And people asked me to describe her, and I kind of sketched her out a little bit, and I didn't have the vocabulary to describe that she was wearing, I think, what they called a pedophore. She was like a maid, a servant, and she had like roughly crisscross pattern on her top part, and then the color of her dress and the apron. I could see her hair and how it was pulled back, her height. And I said, and she is the main servant or female slave of the main owner, female of this house. And she actually she was treated nicely, that she loves it here. She loves the house. It was this whole kind of very good feeling. She's still here because she still loves this place. It was her home, and on and on and on. So then later on in the evening, some people there were at the mansion that knew the place very well. They said, we have to show you something. And they pulled, I think I got this right, Rob, because I think it was a different group that found the painting. But they pulled a family portrait out that had been taken, is what it was, out from behind a clock.
Yes.
And they brought it to me and said, Troy, you got to look at this. And out in front of the house, they had this entire family. And there was, I don't know, a bunch of people there. And the main headmistress of the house was sitting there in a chair. Right behind her was the exact woman I drew and had described and talked about, right behind her holding a tray. And I get chills talking about it even now because it felt very real when it was happening.
Oh, my God.
To me, but to see it confirmed like that just took it to a whole new level.
Boy, it's a good thing the double murder ghost investigation is such a powerful story. Otherwise, we'd go downhill from that. So that's great. Okay, excellent. So let's get to the double murder ghost investigation. We're kind of tipping our hand on with the title of that, but it's a great story. Margaret, if you could start us off, how did this request come in? What year was it? And what was the family experiencing at the time that made them reach out to you?
Okay, so I think it was 2013 where I was contacted. And this was one of our first cases. And it was a unique one because it was my step niece that called me. So, I did it a little bit different than what I would do with other cases because I already knew her. I knew what to expect and all that. So she was having experiences. There was someone at the foot of her bed that was pulling the covers off of her. They were waking her up in the middle of the night. Her son kept talking about a monster. There's a monster in the room. There's a monster in the room. And he was in the room next to hers. There was different things like that going on. They heard, there was sounds. I don't think they ever saw anybody other than him saying it was a monster.
Were there shadow people or shadow images at all? Or
I think she was seeing the shadows, but he was physically seeing something because he was only, I think, 3 or 4 at that time. So he was physically seeing somebody. And the only way he could describe it is as a monster. So we didn't know what we were going in for or what we were going to find in the house. Of course, the mediums don't get any of the information. I sent them the address about an hour, 2 hours before they're expected to come in, and they just show up. And yes, it was their first time working with us.
that's crazy.
And so here, of course, we're going through the house with the mediums, and we're recording them on what they're saying because we don't want to forget anything. And that's when Troy kind of, they're recording me. This is going to end up a joke, What did I get myself into? So I don't know how far you want me to go into the investigation yet. So
Just a couple things, if you don't mind. One is, give us the layout of the house. Was it like an apartment downstairs? Was it a renter situation downstairs, a house upstairs, or what was it like, the building?
All right. So the house itself, it was a split level. I think it had 3 bedrooms upstairs with the kitchen, dining room, living room, and then they had a big family room off from the living room. And if you went downstairs, so like on the left side, you went into the laundry room, which the furnace room and laundry was all right there. And then there was a children's playroom. And if you went to the right, coming down the steps, that's where there was the kitchen, a bathroom, another living room or family room, whatever you want to call it, and 2 more bedrooms.
Okay. Do you typically have like the tech team go in first? I don't know if you call it the tech team, but the people that walk around with the recorders and check for EVPs and check for orbs and things like that. Do they tend to go before them, or does it matter when you send the different teams out?
Well, at the beginning, when we did this case, the mediums went in first. And for a while that worked until it didn't. Because people came in and they were hearing what the mediums were saying. So then they were making the investigation about what the mediums said. And we didn't want that. You got to keep it separate and then try to bring it together afterwards. So we changed it up, and I think it works very well, because also what happened was when the mediums went first and then we went for the investigation, the mediums would have to go in a second time to clear it. So if they could clear anything, they would have to go back a second time. Whereas now we do the investigation, we send the mediums in, and if there needs to be a clearing, they do it all in one visit, and it works out a lot better.
Did any families before your relatives experience stuff before them that you had heard about in doing your research, or no?
Did not hear about it, could not find any information. They were renting the home. I normally don't like to go into a rental because I like to have the owner's permission. But because of who it was, I did it for her. And that's why we couldn't do too much on trying to clear the home.
Okay. Before I kick it over to Rob and Troy, did they stay in the house after the investigation, or did they want to move out right away?
They did stay in the house for about a year, and then they ended up moving out.
Okay. So now, Rob, we're going to go back to you. Let's talk about, as Margaret said, you don't get much advance notice and you get zero information. So if I recall correctly, you went to this house and there was a white door that right away kind of triggered something, which played off once you and Troy were inside and were getting some other signals. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, Troy and I met up front in the driveway, and Margaret, I distinctly remember Margaret saying, "Are you guys ready to come in?" And Troy and I looked at each other and we both said, "No, we actually want to walk around the house." So because we were both getting impressions that on the left-hand side of the house, there was something important connected to whatever had happened in the house. So yes, there was a white door on the left-hand side of the house. What used to be, I guess, a garage was made into a family room, or a children's room, like a daycare kind of room. And there was a white door there on the side. Now, there was also an electrical box outside, so we had to use the K2 meter to make sure that there was no electrical disturbances coming from there, because electrical disturbances will make you feel paranoia or like somebody's watching you or something. But there wasn't any reading. When we walked over to that door, we both distinctly felt that the door had some serious residual energy. And Troy, you had a sensation about your wrists when you touched the door.
This overwhelming sense of just dread and grief and urgency. In the recording that they have, I'm saying things like, wow, there's just so much energy on that door. It's on that doorknob. I don't know what's going on there. It's like somebody was urgently coming in and out, like the door is opening and closing, and they're in a panic, and it's like in and out, and it's like all this energy. Something really awful happened here at this door, and I don't know what it was, but whoever it was had such a level of intensity and fear and panic and all of it, that the energy is all over that door. And then, as Rob said, there's a big power junction or box near it, so we had to try to figure out if that was causing that sense or not. Sometimes it can. But in this case, no, it was actually the impression left on the door.
And Troy, I distinctly remember, too, that you said that your hands felt weighted down, your forearms, like they were wrapped together.
Yeah.
So that was kind of ominous to us, Bob. We're thinking, what is going on here? The first thing you think of when you go to a home, a private home, is that maybe it was a domestic situation. That's always in the back of your mind. But the investigation took us in a different direction. So we proceeded to go around the house, and then Troy sensed a shadow on the other side of the house.
Yeah, it's as we walked around the back side, there was a kind of a back porch, screened in porch area. And I remember on my way back through there, and I thought, at this point, I'm thinking, I'm getting all these impressions, and I'm thinking, wow, this looks like, I feel like there's a lot of blood right there. And there's like something really awful happening. I'm like, okay, Troy, they're going to tell you somebody's pet gerbil died, and that's what this whole investigation's about. And you're making up all this stuff about blood and doors and whatever. So I'm like, oh, whatever. And I just went for it in faith. And I just spoke what I had to speak. After that, I walked around to the other side, opposite side of the house. And I felt through the wall of that side of the house. I didn't know yet what was on the other side of that because I hadn't been inside the house yet. But it felt like some sense of just absolute, utter loss. Just somebody who all hope just fell out of them at some point. They were just hopelessly in there. So much so, it was like it was a dark type of shadow over the entire wall. Like it was that kind of big impression. And so I remember describing that and just being overwhelmed by that. And what bothered me about that was I could feel empathetically what I was feeling, like empathically. But as far as like getting a visual at that point, the visual wasn't happening. It was just this overwhelming sense.
Now, how does it work between you and Robert? It sounds like you both of you get visuals, like from the dream you had with the gentleman, but you also sense things. Are you auditory too, or what? Are you just a mixture of all of that, or how does it work?
It's different for everyone. For me, it's funny. I wrote down while we were talking the word calico cat because it depends. Like sometimes I will hear things. I mean, out loud, like you physically can hear it. Other times, it's a sense of discernment, which is feeling of the good and bad energy and knowing if something is like really, really bad or evil, or if it's a ghost, or if it's a spirit, or if it's something else, or even a living person that you're sensing. And then other times it can be a sense of chills and physical sensations on your body and even smells. But typically, most of the time for me, it's a visualization that happens inside my spirit mind and an overwhelming empathic sense of the emotion that someone felt or is feeling at that point. My brain, when I start feeling and sensing things empathically like that, and I start feeling the emotion of something, your imagination it's a tool. It just starts going to work, trying to put a visual based on your own experiences of something that's as close as it can get to what you're feeling. That's just what your brain does. And I've learned to use that feature of our brain as a really good tool because I let my brain go and I let the imagination go. And by doing that, now I've gotten to the point where my imagination and my brain power and all of that is really good at finally putting together a visual representation of what it is that I'm feeling. And that's when I start writing and drawing, describing things to people. And that's when some of the accurate stuff starts coming out. And sometimes it's gotten so good that you get a photograph of somebody that, like the lady I told you about, where they come out and I see her. And that's exactly what materialized in my mind. So it's really for me, it's a spiritual melding of my brain, my imagination, and my heart, and my spirit, my mind, and my senses all meld together in one kind of new hybrid thing. And what's really cool about that is it's gotten easy for me now to separate the feelings and empathic sense that I get and emotions that I get from a ghost or an energy. And I'm able to separate that from my own feelings of things that I have. Because growing up, I didn't know that I had these senses. I had no training how to use that kind of ability. So everything you feel as a teenager and as a child, you think are your own. You don't know that you're actually picking up the emotions and senses of something external to you, and you mistakenly think it's your own. So imagine having that gift as a kid, and you walk through someone's house where someone was murdered or abused, and you feel that, but you don't know why you feel it. You think there's something wrong with you because you're feeling these really weird, awkward feelings. And I think that's why it's really important that when parents and people figure out that their child has some of these senses and some of these abilities, or potentially does, they need to seek out some professionals and people who know how to do this and what this is all about to help that kid be able to separate the feelings. What's the ghost? What's the spirit? What's empathically that you're feeling versus what is actually your own? It's hard enough being a teenager, let alone trying to feel everybody else in the room like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like the barn door is open for you now, though, Troy. I did an episode a while back about remote viewing, and having you talk, I can't help but think you would be really, really good at that. Rob, you too, probably, how to do remote viewing. There was one of the leading experts that we had on. It was I just thinking about you guys with what you sense, what you feel, and what you're drawing probably would translate. But Rob, getting back to once you guys went inside the house, you and Troy both picked up on a female, and normally you'd think it's the same one, but that wasn't the case. You want to walk us through that, when you kind of realized what you were getting and when you realized that you and Troy were picking up different entities?
Sure. Well, once we get to the front door, after we circle the house, Margaret said to me, "Which way do you want to go?" And I told her that I was immediately drawn to the basement. So we went downstairs, and I felt like I had to go to the left, and Troy was right next to me. We took a left, and it basically leads to a small furnace room. And in that furnace room, both Troy and I were hit with some severe vertigo. So that indicated to me that there was a lot of residual energy in there. And residual energy is generated by emotional events. It could be traumatically emotional, or it could be happy emotional. But this was traumatic emotion. When we got into that daycare room, all of a sudden we experienced temperature changes, and we both started sensing a woman. And what's interesting there, Bob, is that we didn't know that we were actually talking to two different women. I was talking to an older woman, and Troy was talking to a younger woman. And Troy, I think it was 15 minutes until we compared notes and tried to figure it out.
Yeah, because we were really confused, because usually when we, after that was our first time doing this together. But since then, we usually compare notes and we're usually talking about the same thing. But in that case, he's like describing this older woman and about how old she was. And I'm like, oh, that's weird, because I'm sensing a younger woman in her 20s with long hair, and she's reaching up almost in this mercy position, like, please help me. And he's like, yeah, that's not what I'm seeing. And so that was confusing. I thought, well, I'm probably way off. This is my first time doing this. And then we found out later that we were both right on.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty fascinating. Troy also got the letter M, which for the first name. And as it turned out, we found out that one of the women who were killed in the home was named Marissa. So he picked up on that. What's interesting, though,
I get chills when you say
yeah. So when we're both sensing these things, Bob, sometimes the ghosts will share things, and we both actually sensed that they were earthbound ghosts, meaning that they were intelligent, that they had chosen to stay there. Now we had to solve the puzzle about what happened to them and why they're staying there. So I can tell you that the older woman that I sensed was very frail looking and very thin. And she showed me that she had dark brown hair. And she showed me an image to help identify who she was. She was standing at a counter. She was preparing food. She was chopping up vegetables. I later learned, we all later learned, that she actually managed a bar where she served drinks and food. So that was her way of providing proof of her identity.
That's right. And the younger woman, she further revealed herself to me when we were walking through the downstairs area to where the two bedrooms and there was a kitchenette and a small living space downstairs, and then two bedrooms at the far end. And as I walked through that space, I remember looking over at the fireplace, and there was the fireplace tools, a poker, and all those things. And I remember just feeling all of this awful energy around the fireplace and around this tool, which later found out that was one of the tools that was used in the abuse that happened. And then I went into the bedroom, the big bedroom downstairs. I stood at the end there was a king-size bed in there, and I was just walking through, and there was one spot right at the right-hand bottom corner of the bed where I stood. And subsequently that happened to be the bedroom that was on the opposite side of the wall from where I was outside before, when I felt the dark shadow and I felt the hopelessness and all of that.
Uh-huh.
So at this point in investigation, I'm standing at the foot of this bed, and I just froze in place. For just about maybe 5 to 10 minutes, I was overwhelmed with feeling the entire emotional energy of a female, a young woman, who was standing in that same spot in this hopeless, I'm going to die and there's nothing I can do feeling. I'm going to die. And it was just all the energy and life and hopelessness. I could just feel it. And I stood there and I cried. It just overwhelmed me. And we later found out at the end that people were talking about it, that the carpet was covering where a bloodstain was and that they could hardly get off the floor. And we found that out later.
So when you say you found that out later, I think Margaret probably works with maybe does Margaret do the history, or who does the history?
Yeah.
Is there another person that does the history, or?
So Rhonda is a team member and she usually does a lot of the history. And we tried to get a police report. I think Margaret got kind of a limited police report that actually we used to confirm a lot of the things that we got in the house from the ghosts. So after we left the basement, Bob, we went upstairs, and upstairs we had some more sensations. It was upstairs, I believe, that with the tech team, when they went in the next day, I believe, they were able to catch a shadow figure in the hallway. But it was upstairs where I first started getting the physical sensations from the ghosts about what happened to them when they were alive.
So the violence that happened to them was downstairs, but you felt it upstairs?
Well, it started upstairs because I remember standing at the top of the stairs and I felt like I was being pushed down the stairs from behind. And I felt the sensation of tumbling down the stairs, head over heels until I got to the bottom.
And then we both had splitting headaches during that time. And I remember at the bottom of the stairs to the left where Rob and I remember describing, it felt like we walked through this invisible bubble of energy. Like when you would walk into that space, it was like you could literally feel it. You walked into it and felt this incredible, overwhelming sense of energy. And at one point, Rob, I remember you saying, please stop the recordings, turn off the tape. I have something I have to say.
I did.
Yeah. And I was like, oh my God, you'll never know how happy I was to hear you say that, because I was so intimidated by what I wanted to say that I was afraid to say it on the recording myself. And then when they stopped it and you said, I don't want to scare the homeowners, I don't want to scare the whoever's, but then you said, this is where I think somebody was violently hit and killed and all of this. And I remember I just spoke out loud. I'm like, oh my God. And I used the word bitch slap. I'm like, this woman was backhanded so hard it knocked her down over. And then Rob went on because he was then connecting to her energy and her spirit while I connected to the younger lady.
So it was the older woman that fell down the stairs, Rob?
Yeah, I felt that it was the older woman, but the younger woman was also she was beaten. So bottom line, the sensations that I experienced that they shared with me, and I think both of these ghosts were sharing sensations with me. I was pushed down the stairs, I was beaten, I was hit, and I was shot. And one of the women, when I asked Margaret to turn that microphone, that recorder off, it was the female ghost who asked me to turn the microphone off, the recorder off, because there was some sense of humiliation, even though there shouldn't have been. She was sexually molested by this murderer, and it made me feel, I don't know, it made me feel very awkward, and that's why I asked Mark to turn the recorder off, and then we turned it back on. But just experiencing those physical sensations, you have to tell the ghost to just let it go, and I just won't forget it, because you're right. You were right when you said in the beginning, Bob, I was severely physically abused, but these ghosts were actually showing me their sensations about the trauma and horror that they endured before they died.
So, Margaret, Rob has told me in prior episodes at the end of an investigation to kind of cleanse them a little bit, they have chocolate. I'm hoping you got Rob like one of those 5-pound, super large Hershey bars after all the abuse he went through on this. Half kidding, because he went through a lot. But I mean, as you're there with them, I believe, and you probably know the backstory of the house a little bit. How did you kind of, from what they were feeling, how did you guys piece together and kind of resolve the mystery of what happened in the house?
All right. Well, first, I knew what happened in the house. I already had the police report, so I knew everything. And, when you're going around and listening to them say things that they're saying, and that it is connecting with what's in the reports, it is very hard to keep your mouth shut. And when they told me to turn the recorder off, I regret that. I still regret it because everything they said when the recorder was off was true. And I knew it was true because I already knew what happened. As far as the chocolate, nope, this was our first case. I didn't take chocolate. I wish I did, but I didn't have chocolate that time.
So there was a guy living in the basement who ended up murdering, if I remember correctly, the older woman. Did she own the house? And the younger woman was maybe an in-law or a relative that was visiting. Could you piece together kind of the time frame? And were they both there at the same time? Did they both die at the same time, or was one killed first and another one later?
All right. So the older woman, she owned a bar and she lived there. And the guy that killed them lived downstairs. Her daughter in law was over. She was also friends with the guy that lived there. And she was over visiting. I can tell you that it happened on Super Bowl Sunday.
Jeez.
Yep. So he beat them so bad. The older woman was slapped down the steps where she lost her glasses, went one way and she went the other. He beat them so bad and he raped the younger one in the one bedroom, which is the one where my niece was feeling somebody in there. He raped her with the gun and then he shot the gun while it was inside her. They were not dead. He dragged them through the utility room, the laundry room, out that white door into the carport, put them in the trunk of one of their cars. I don't remember which one. Put them in the trunk, drove it down to a set of apartments not far from the house, and left them there where they bled to death.
Now, he was a drug addict, correct?
Yes.
Do you know what he was on?
I don't. He still denies it to this day that he killed him. He still thinks, says he's innocent. He got 3 life sentences for the 2 murders.
Is he still alive? This was like in 2000, right, or something, roughly when this happened? Or?
Yes, it was. And yes, he still is. And the odd thing about it is that the guy, the murderer, I know his sister. And I didn't know that until after the fact.
Did you like his sister, or is this just a troubled family all the way around?
I did. No, she was very nice.
Okay. Wow.
So, I mean,
oh my God.
we were acquaintances. It wasn't like she was a good friend of mine, but we were acquaintances. But it was kind of odd. And I said, okay, do I ask her about this? And I ended up asking her, and she still says, nope, he's innocent. He didn't do it.
Oh. Then you bring Rob and Troy over.
Yeah.
They set her straight. Oh, my God. So would you describe this as, look, like there's ghosts, there's residual energy? I don't know if there's something like a projection going on or whatever. How would you describe this? It seems like a lot of different things. I mean, 90%, like Rob has told me before, 90% of hauntings are residual, but this seems to be everything in the kitchen sink. Was this like a bunch of different things baked in?
I think that it was a little bit of everything because there was a lot of residual energy there too. I think our biggest regret, and still today, is that we never got in there to clear that home. So as far as we know, they're still there.
You just couldn't get approval from the landlord, or did you try to, remove them, but they didn't want to leave? What was the case?
We couldn't get the approval, and then my niece moved out,
Wow.
so we never got back in there. And now, believe it or not, the house is like a drug rehab.
Really? Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. Wow. So, Troy, this being your first investigation, what was the next one after this one like? I'm hoping it was just like kind of mellow. Do you remember the investigation after this one?
I don't remember exactly. We've gone on so many. Do you remember, Rob, which investigation was next?
I have a feeling that it was crossing a ghost over in the ladies' room of the IGT meeting house.
Okay. I was wondering if that's what it was.
Yeah, and I'd rather not talk about that one.
Okay, wow. Rob, can you say again the two books that this appears in, the titles, and where they can buy this?
Sure. The new book that appears in is Case Files of Inspired Ghost Tracking, and there's more details in that version. The other version is in Lessons Learned from Talking to the Dead, and they're both on Amazon. But one thing we didn't mention, Bob, that's really important that listeners will be interested in is that we have a photograph that shows the face of one,
Oh, right. You're right. The orb. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, of one of the women, what appears to be one of the women. So there was an orb in the daycare room near the furnace where we sensed both women. And one of the IGT photographers took a picture of it. And then when we blew it up, we looked at the top of the orb. And it was actually my husband that actually found it. The face of a woman. And you can clearly see eye, nose, cheek, mouth, lips.
Wow.
Yeah. It's frightening.
Was it the older woman or the younger woman, Rob?
It looks like the younger woman to me.
And was her face like in anxiety, or was it like just a normal expression?
It was kind of a blank look.
Wow, that's incredible. Is there anything else you want to add as a postmortem, Rob, that we haven't probably covered yet in this story?
Just a caution that if anybody thinks that they have a ghost in their house, that number one, treat them with respect. Number two, treat them like an invisible roommate. Number three, call a paranormal investigation team so that they can help that ghost cross over and achieve peace for both the living family and peace for the ghost who inhabits the house.
And how long did it take you to recover from this? Was there like a week or two where you were totally affected by it, or were you able to remove yourself from it?
It took me a couple of days, I think, to get over the traumatic story and just the feelings of what I experienced that the ghosts shared with me. So, yeah, it was a couple of days.
Okay. And in closing, give us your website. Again, you're also beyond finding Rob Guttrow on Amazon. What's your website where they can follow newer things? Because you have a new book, Pets in the Afterlife 3, and you're always working on new and great stuff.
Sure. They can just go to petspirits.com or robguttrow.com. And there are a variety of other books. There's going to be a Case Files of Inspired Ghost Tracking 2 in the future because we have had so many cases. More Pets in the Afterlife, and a couple of special books about places that I've traveled that are haunted.
Cool. And Troy, what about you? Do you just do this on the side, or do you offer services? Do you have a website or anything where people can contact you?
Actually, Rob was talking to me about that very thing, but so far I've been contributing. I've contributed, I think, one or two stories in some of the investigations in Rob's books. Thought about writing one, and Rob said he'd be happy to help me out with that. I might take him up on that, but so far, no. I do it on the side.
We're recording it, so don't worry. Yeah, he's great. Definitely use it. Yeah, you got some great experiences. It would be great, I'm sure. Okay, cool. So it sounds like they would contact you or find out about you at Inspired Ghost Tracking. Mm-hmm. So let me, Margaret, if you don't mind, get you back in to close this. If someone is in Maryland, okay, and they want to get in touch with you, what is the email? What is the website that they should contact you with?
The email is inspiredghost without the O at AOL.com. They can find me on Facebook at Inspired Ghost Tracking, or the website is inspiredghosttracking.com, which takes you to our meetup site where we do lectures and fun investigations that people can go with us.
And when are you guys going to start up again in 2021 if you haven't already?
We have been going strong on doing Facebook lectures. So we go live on our Facebook page, Inspired Ghost Tracking, and we have been doing a few investigations. We've got one coming up next month at the Roundhouse. So we're going to go to the Roundhouse and see what we can come up with and find.
This sounds like a local place. Where is the Roundhouse?
Martinsburg Roundhouse is in Martinsburg, West Virginia.
At a very high level, what's the ghost story going on there?
They have all kinds of ghosts going on there. It's big, huge property, and they've seen a woman walking around. There's been men walking around, children. They got all kinds of stuff going on. So we're going to go see what we can find.
Sounds like Rob and Troy are going to be pretty busy. Are you guys going to do a road show anywhere? Do you stay pretty much? Do you ever go outside of Maryland, or are you going to ever step outside somewhere? Is that kind of a vision at some point?
The vision would be nice to do that. Right now, we are still pretty local. We have gone to Gettysburg and done some things there, but we do lectures here in Maryland, and they can reach me at the inspired ghost at AOL.com.
All right, that's an excellent show. First time with 3 guests. You all were phenomenal. Rob, no surprise with you, my friend. Thank you as always.
Well, thank you, Bob. Good to be back. And I look forward to chatting with you again in the future.
And Margaret, great job. Thank you for providing this service to people in need of a group like yours for residential hauntings. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate you letting us on.
And Troy, never doubt yourself, my friend. You are phenomenal by all aspects. So I'm so glad you found this calling and you met Rob, and I wish you great investigations in the future. Thank you for being on the show.
Hey, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to recant and talk about these stories. It's actually very empowering, and appreciate the opportunity.
You've been listening to the Afraid of Nothing podcast. Please subscribe and like us on Facebook. Until next time, stay scared.
Hey, you're still here? Great. Then why not listen to another episode? Visit afraidofnothingpodcast.com to peruse all the shows. That's afraidofnothingpodcast.com. And while you're there, click the coffee cup icon to buy me a coffee and leave a review. I'll give you a shout out in an upcoming episode, and the world will know how swell you are.